Sonic Frontiers reception-wise has quite literally been all over the place in the build-up to its release. It's been up, down, all around. It has been a roller coaster to say the least, and I can't help but find that story interesting. This game was being received badly at one point, to the extent where it almost looked unsalvageable. But now, here we are today. And not only does the game look much better to play, but also the majority of people who've gotten the chance to play the demo have been extremely positive about it. And that's everyone ranging from reviewers to content creators. Even Masahiro Sakurai himself gave the game a thumbs up. So, what happened? It wasn't even that long ago that this game was being almost universally panned. Well, that's what this video is about. The redemption of Sonic Frontiers. It's worth noting that the reception for this game didn't start off being negative, and I think it's worth even briefly going over that time period because why not? It'll set the scene. Let's flash back to May 2021 during a Sonic Central. At this point, it had been almost 4 years since the last mainline Sonic game, Sonic Forces. And say what you will about it, there's no denying that Forces wasn't received well. So Sonic Team had a lot to prove with this next installment, and a lot of people were very curious as to what they had in store, since at this point it had been quite a while since Forces. Well, this was what we got. A CGI trailer that admittedly does look very nice, but it didn't give a whole lot of information. Sonic runs through some kind of forest, does what looks to be a boost, and then runs in a circle before it shows us some cryptic looking symbol. Given barely anything was shown, there wasn't much to get excited for here other than there being a new Sonic game. That being said, I'm pretty sure that's all the trailer was setting out to do, so whatever, fair enough. But fast forward to later that same year, and we got what I would consider to be a much better trailer. Finally, there were things to actually talk about. Even though everything was still very vague, we were at least given a better idea on what kind of game this one would be. Open world. Or open zone as it was soon corrected to. We didn't get to see any gameplay, but this trailer still delivered in a lot of ways, and safe to say, this was getting people's attention. In my eyes, this was the real teaser trailer for Sonic Frontiers, and the previous one was more of an announcement trailer. Which is funny because, surprisingly, they're labeled the complete opposite way around. But I digress. What I'm trying to get at is that Sonic Frontiers was in a pretty good spot around this time. It had a lot of eyes on it and tons of people were interested in what the game had to offer. Up to this point, everything had been going pretty smoothly for Sonic Frontiers. But as we all know, this wasn't going to last. It all started with the announcement that IGN were going to be the ones to unveil what the gameplay would be like for Sonic Frontiers. Needless to say, this was a big moment for this game, and I, along with a lot of other people, couldn't help but be a bit nervous. Excited, but nervous. And with Forces being Sonic Team's last title, you couldn't really blame anyone for that. Regardless, everyone was still very eager to see how the gameplay would shape up, and this is what we were shown. This reveal was awful. There's no other way to go about it. Regardless of any snippets that might have looked decent, they were far outweighed by how bad the reveal was overall. There were a few good reasons as to why. Firstly, the game looked unfinished. The floating rails and objects were jarring enough as they were, but on top of that, there was a decent amount of pop-in and a number of animations that were done significantly better a whole 10 years ago. The game just felt off, as if it wasn't ready to be shown yet. The person who was playing for this footage wasn't doing it any favors either. They just played so slow. And when they were moving around, they made a point to avoid any enemies as well as a decent number of puzzles and platforming challenges. In other words, they weren't playing the game normally, they weren't playing the game like how someone might actually play it. And in general, that approach just made the game look boring. There were a lot of concerns that this gameplay reveal brought up, and safe to say, this was a terrible first impression. What made this even worse was how many eyes were on this game around this time. Like I said, before this gameplay reveal, Frontiers had a lot of people curious, but after this video dropped, public reception for this game plummeted. It was almost hard to find people being positive because it felt like everyone was being disappointed with what was being shown. The only bright side to this whole situation was that this wasn't the only showcase we were getting, and a video focusing on the combat was due to come out a few days later. Unfortunately, this video was not enough to save this game's reputation. The combat may have looked promising, but nothing overly interesting was shown. In general, the combat looked a little button mashy, and the enemies weren't anything to write home about. This even applied to the boss that was shown that somehow looked easier to beat than the common enemies. All in all, this was an alright showcase to show off the combat, but it still left a lot to be desired. And it didn't help that this video addressed next to none of the concerns that came from the initial showcase, and I think that only set in stone everyone's general opinions on the game, with the majority of people saying that the game looked bad. And a lot of those people left the discussion surrounding this game thinking just that, which was reflected in the heavy drop in viewership between each consecutive showcase. What made this so bad was that this third video here marked the start of a turning point for Frontiers, and the reason why wasn't because of any new footage. Most of what was shown in the video was stuff we'd already seen. Instead, what made this video so much better than the previous two was that this one had commentary. It was a first impressions video from someone at IGN who was able to play the game for a few hours, and the things that they talked about helped paint a better picture of how the game would play out, as well as addressing some of the concerns that people were having with Frontiers. There were a good few takeaways from this video. For example, there was the mention of a skill tree that would unlock over time as you defeated enemies and made your way through the game. This was a relief, because there was a bit of concern that we'd already been shown all the moves that Sonic could perform. Another piece of information, while small, was the confirmation that the footage shown was of an early build, and while that didn't exactly excuse any of the issues shown, it at least meant that it was possible that some of the issues had already been dealt with. There was even the confirmation of traditional linear 3D Sonic stages that you could unlock from beating bosses, though at this point we weren't given any footage. This was all important information, but I'd argue that none of it was as important as what we heard towards the end of the video.
But ultimately, my time with this early build answered the one question I had on my mind. Will Sonic's one-of-a-kind gameplay translate into an open world? The answer is a resounding absolutely. Thanks for watching.
I don't really have anything to add. The clip speaks for itself, and it raised a lot of people's hopes for Frontiers. Around the same time that this video released, there was actually a demo for the game present at Summer Game Fest. This was a closed demo. Supposedly you needed an appointment to even try it, and no recording of the footage was allowed. Of course that didn't stop people, and tons of blurry, zoomed out footage of Frontiers started floating around the internet. Nothing too much of note came from it, but it was very funny watching people try to analyze such low quality videos. And thankfully, these were not the main takeaway from this demo. There were other things that were much more interesting. Firstly, there was official new footage of the game released, and even though it had only been about 2 weeks since the IGN gameplay reveal, this new footage was already looking a lot better. Also, whoever they got to play this time around did a much better job showing off the game. In general, it looked faster, better to control, and all around smoother to play. The other big takeaway from this demo was hearing people's impressions of what they had played. Because a game can only look so good or so bad, what really matters at the end of the day is that the game is fun. And apparently, it was. Almost everyone was liking it. We were seeing article after article, video after video, and the majority of what people had to say was incredibly positive. It was a weird time for this game. 2 weeks previous, everyone was bashing it and saying it looked awful, but now people were praising it and saying they had a good time with it? Yeah, it was weird. As time went on and more information came out about the game, things somehow kept getting better. There were more demos at more events, and the reception to those echoed what we'd already been hearing. People were really liking it. What came coupled with that was more information regarding the cyberspace levels, which was the name given to those traditional 3D Sonic stages. Basically, you'll find these entrances across the open zone, and those will give you access to these bite-sized stages that are based on Sonic's past levels. And I'm not just talking about aesthetics. A decent chunk, if not the majority of cyberspace levels shown, had almost the exact same level design as some of Sonic's previous stages. Something that wasn't met very well with fans, even with the excuse that these were meant to be loosely tied to Sonic's memories. Cyberspace as a whole has been one of the less positively received aspects of Frontiers, and that's not to say that people don't like it, because I saw a decent number of people who enjoyed their time with it during the demo. But that didn't stop these levels from generally being the least praised part of this game. Which is funny, because of course the part of the game that gets the most criticism is the traditional Sonic stages. The main complaint I've seen surrounding these levels is in regard to their length, since they seem to be around a minute long on average. And even though this isn't ideal, it looks to be counteracted by the decent amount of stages that will be present in this game. Also the fact that cyberspace isn't the main focus of Frontiers, far from it. The open zone is. These levels are only meant to act as a fun bonus you can unlock along your journey, similar to how the shrines are in Breath of the Wild. But aside from the cyberspace levels being a bit mixed in opinions, things were really looking up for Frontiers. It's weird to think that there was only really a week of it being bad before the negativity started turning around. Except, that's not exactly how things played out. You see, while I've been mentioning all of this positivity surrounding the game, this change in reception was mainly happening within the Sonic community. Meanwhile, on the outside, a lot of people still thought that Frontiers was going to be bad. The damage that was done from that initial gameplay reveal stuck with the game, even through all of this. So while the reception for Frontiers was getting better, it was just happening at a much slower pace outside of the Sonic community. So how are things looking for the game now? Thankfully, Frontiers has seemingly been keeping that upward trend in regard to its reputation. The game has improved a lot, both physically in the actual footage and through all of the reveals of what will be found in the final game. Seeing more of what the combat has to offer, seeing more details on the story, more of the open zone, new enemies, the different islands, the list goes on. And all of it looks really promising, though I'm not going to pretend that the game is looking perfect. The occasional pop-in seems to have been a consistent issue throughout all the footage, cyberspace is a little mixed in opinions, and there's also a little jank here and there. But I still think that overall, this game has completely turned itself around. Comparing what we were first seeing to what we have now is almost jarring. The game really has improved that much, and if it isn't the actual game itself that's improving, then at the least the way the game is being showcased has improved tremendously. And now here we are with only a few days left before Sonic Frontiers releases, and what a wild ride the marketing for this game has been. The redemption arc was a strong one. Though I can't say for sure how good Sonic Frontiers will end up being. It could be good, bad, who knows, we'll be finding out soon enough. But for now, all that I know is that I'll absolutely be making a video once I get my hands on it. So if that's something you think you'd like to see, or if you just enjoy content like this, then a subscribe would be more than appreciated. But on that note, since I've just about covered this story, I'm gonna end it here. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.